Thank you for joining us on this segment of Remembering Our Past, Creating Our Future. This is a series of interviews with selected supporters of the Future Kings program. The supporters selected have been instrumental in the design and strategic focus of Future Kings. They discuss elements of their lives that have shaped their perspectives on the value of the work of Future Kings. Now let's look at the life of Future Kings supporter James Garrett.
Yes, I'm James Garrett. I am the founder and former owner and CEO of Centel Corporation, an engineering and software development company that we did a lot of work for the Department of Defense with over 350 engineers and scientists. I grew up in North Carolina in a small town called Sedalia, North Carolina, and I was a sharecropper. My family was sharecropping. Of course, sharecropping is more prevalent these days in that with all the talk about slavery, the sharecropping came out of slavery when the people that owned slaves, the slaves didn't know where to go, or the enslaved people didn't know where to go, and the people that owned the big farms and plantations didn't have labor, so they kind of had an agreement that if the people that were their enslaved people would stay on, then they could become sharecroppers, and allegedly they would get half of the work that they did. And so we raised tobacco as a main crop, and when you took tobacco to the market and sold it, you would get half of it. But the long story, the backstory of that is that the sharecroppers never really came out the way it was alleged that they would. Then I went, after high school, I went to North Carolina State A&T University, and North Carolina A&T State University, and studied engineering. And I graduated as an electrical engineer, and upon graduation I was commissioned by the Army as a second lieutenant in the Army by going through the ROTC program. And while in the Army, I went to Vietnam, and in Vietnam I was in charge of communications, electronic communications, that is like radio communications from all up and down the east coast, the coast of Vietnam, South Vietnam. And coming out of Vietnam, I went to work for the Navy. So I left the Army and went to work for the Navy in Washington, D.C., and ultimately worked for the Naval Sea Systems Command, who builds, designs, and builds ships for all ships of the Navy. And I spent about 15 years there, and while there, I rose up to become the top person in charge of topside design of all Navy ships as it relates to antenna placement, electromagnetic interference. And this is where, when you have navigation, satellite, communications, radar, and all these different types of systems on top of ships, when they all try to communicate or do something simultaneously, you get interference. And they call that electromagnetic interference, which is the signals that go through the air and electromagnetic waves, kind of like television. And this interference then creates a problem where the radar systems can't see targets coming in, or you get garbled communications. And so there's a lot of work that goes into figuring out how do you place, up to 100 different communications or receiving systems on top of a ship, and all these systems are trying to do something simultaneously. On top of that, ships that are in company at sea, if they are 5 miles from each other, then they could interfere with another ship. And some of this interference could cause missiles to go astray. So it's a very complex area, and but it's one of the things that you study in electrical engineering. You study electromagnetic wave theory, which a lot of people have difficulty in terms of trying to imagine or envision that. And that's where I had a lot of difficulty in understanding that. However, my career was in that, and so ultimately I became to know a lot about that. As I rose to the top in the Naval Sea Systems Command, they had about 3,000 civilians, and there were very few people that were at the top. And so I was one of those persons, and I got the idea that I would like to start my own business. And because I saw other companies doing work for me as contractors, and I thought, well, maybe I could do this myself. So I left the Navy. I didn't retire. I left the government as a government engineer and started my own company called Sentel, Sentel. And Sentel did communication systems and topside design of systems and ships. So we worked with trying to help ships to communicate and navigate and do radar targets and all that without interference. So it was one of the big things we did. We also did testing of all kinds of systems. We did testing for the Federal Aviation Administration. When they build airplanes, they have to put navigation and radar systems on those airplanes. And so we would test all of those systems before they went, in full operation. Another thing that we did was we did work for NASA. And in NASA, we have to build systems for the spaceship, where you could actually test the spaceships with computers. Some of the early designs of handheld computers, we were able to do that for NASA. So overall, did a lot of work for several government agencies, but most of it was in engineering and technology. And so we hired about 350 engineers and scientists. And so we were very specialized in that, in a small company working for the government, where you do primarily engineering. And we wanted to stick to that. So because in engineering, we kind of had a niche. And so that kind of helped us just kind of separate ourselves from a lot of other businesses that were also in competitive spaces. So there are companies that work in IT, which is a broad field. We wanted to do something that was more narrow, and that way we have less competition, and that kind of helped us to grow as well as build a strong engineering company. Ultimately, I sold Sentel and retired. However, I'm kind of an entrepreneur and a type A type person. So retirement doesn't necessarily agree with me, and I'm not one of the persons that likes to just play golf all day long or go fishing all day long. So I continue to do consulting, do some consulting with my old company, and I do consulting with other businesses. And while doing this, while I was in business, I ran into Eric King, and he was telling me about what he does with Future Kings, where he takes on young boys and teaches them a lot about technology and cyber engineering, as well as other areas. And this kind of intrigued me, and when I first, Eric invited me to one of his sessions on Saturday morning, and I was blown away because I could see these young boys in like 7th, 8th grade being able to learn how to program computers. And I thought that was very, very interesting, and some of it seemed to me was on the college level. And so I became very excited about what Eric has been doing, and I watched him over the years, and I just think it's amazing what he and the team of people have done with these young boys, and getting them involved in all the latest technology, artificial intelligence, cyber systems, computer programming, even involved in DNA and all of the things that go along with that. So I've been super impressed, and I believe that what Future Kings has done or is doing is on the cutting edge, and I would like to see Future Kings be integrated in all communities, especially for what we consider for our boys that may not get this head start in terms of you have, I would say, black and brown boys and even girls to be able to get involved in STEM, because that is really where our whole future lies in, with the whole United States and the whole world, is how we're able to take on this technology, embrace it, and there's no better way to do this than get an early start. And it's amazing to me how much these boys can learn, with some of the things that I didn't learn until I was in college. And so that's what so excited me and attracted me to Future Kings. And I think that they will really go places. They just need the right platform and the right resources and the right connections, which I believe Eric has done a super job of doing that. So I really wish him all the best. Continue to do that, and you can get more people involved and more kids involved. I think that has potential of being something that the whole country will need for the future. I would urge all organizations, including colleges, universities, corporations, churches. I would urge anybody that is interested in the future of our youth, which I think most people are, to look at this program that of Future Kings, of what Garrett has done. And I believe that with the right resources, and I urge people that have the resources and have the time, energy, and funding, I urge you to support this. I think it's a great program also for many government agencies to support. And I don't know which agency is the right agency, but I think somewhere in there, this should be certainly part of government programs as well as university programs that reach down and bring these programs, and so it could be a franchise that goes throughout the country.